Chapter 11. Stalking, Intent, and the Dreaming Position. The next day, in the early evening again, Don Juan came to the room where I was talking with Gennaro. He took me by the arm and walked me through the house to the back patio. It was already fairly dark. We started to walk around in the corridor that encircled the patio. As we walked, Don Juan told me that he wanted to warn me once again that it is very easy in the path of knowledge to get lost in intricacies and morbidity. He said that seers are up against great enemies that can destroy their purpose, muddle their aims, and make them weak. Enemies created by the warrior's path itself, together with the sense of indolence, laziness, and self-importance that are integral parts of the daily world. He remarked that the mistakes the ancient seers made as a result of indolence, laziness, and self-importance were so enormous and so grave that the new seers had no option but to scorn and reject their own tradition. The most important thing the new seers needed, Don Juan continued, was practical steps in order to make their assemblage points shift. Since they had none, they began by developing a keen interest in seeing the glow of awareness. And as a result, they worked out 3 sets of techniques that became their cornerstone. Don Juan said that with these 3 sets, the new seers accomplished a most extraordinary and difficult feat. They succeeded in systematically making the assemblage point shift away from its customary position. He acknowledged that the Old Seers had also accomplished that feat, but by means of capricious, idiosyncratic maneuvers. He explained that what the new seers saw in the glow of awareness resulted in the sequence in which they arranged the Old Seers' truths about awareness. This is known as the mastery of awareness. From that, they developed the 3 sets of techniques. The first is the mastery of stalking. The second is the mastery of intent. And the third is the mastery of dreaming. He maintained that he had taught me these 3 sets from the very first day we met. He told me that he had taught me the mastery of awareness in 2 ways, just as the new seers recommend. In his teachings for the right side, which he had done in normal awareness, he accomplished 2 goals. He taught me the warrior's way, and he loosened my assemblage point from its original position. In his teachings for the left side, which he had done in heightened awareness, he also accomplished 2 goals. He had made my assemblage point shift to as many positions as I was capable of sustaining, and he had given me a long series of explanations. Don Juan stopped talking and stared at me fixedly. There was an awkward silence. Then he started to talk about stalking. He said that it had very humble and fortuitous origins. It started from an observation the new seers made, that when warriors steadily behave in ways not customary for them the unused emanations inside their cocoons begin to glow, and their assemblage points shift in a mild, harmonious, barely noticeable fashion. Stimulated by this observation, the new seers began to practice the systematic control of their behavior. They called this practice the Art of Stalking. Don Juan remarked that the name, although objectionable, was appropriate, because stalking entailed a specific kind of behavior with people, behavior that could be categorized as surreptitious. The new seers, armed with this technique, tackled the known in a sober and fruitful way. By continual practice, they made their assemblage points move steadily. Stalking is one of the two greatest accomplishments of the new seers, he said. The new seers decided that it should be taught to a modern-day Nagual when his assemblage point has moved quite deep into the left side. The reason for this decision is that a Nagual must learn the principles of stalking without the encumbrance of the human inventory. After all, the Nagual is the leader of a group, and to lead them, he has to act quickly without first having to think about it. Other warriors can learn stalking in their normal awareness, although it is advisable that they do it in heightened awareness. Not so much because of the value of heightened awareness, but because it imbues stalking with a mystery that it doesn't really have. Stalking is merely behavior with people. He said that I could now understand that shifting the assemblage point was the reason why the new seers placed such a high value on the interaction with petty tyrants. Petty tyrants forced seers to use the principles of stalking, and in doing so, helped seers to move their assemblage points. I asked him if the old seers knew anything at all about the principles of stalking. Stalking belongs exclusively to the new seers, he said, smiling. They are the only seers who had to deal with people. The old ones were so wrapped up in their sense of power that they didn't even know that people existed until people started clobbering them on the head. But you already know all this. Don Juan said next that the mastery of intent, together with the mastery of stalking, are the new seers' two masterpieces, which mark the arrival of the modern-day seers. He explained that in their efforts to gain an advantage over their oppressors, the new seers pursued every possibility. They knew that their predecessors had accomplished extraordinary feats by manipulating a mysterious and miraculous force, which they could only describe as power. The new seers had very little information about that force, so they were obliged to examine it systematically through their seeing. Their efforts were amply rewarded when they discovered that the energy of alignment is that force. They began by seeing how the glow of awareness increases in size and intensity as the emanations inside the cocoon are aligned with the emanations at large. They used that observation as a springboard, just as they had done with stalking, and went on to develop a complex series of techniques to handle that alignment of emanations. At first, they referred to those techniques as the mastery of alignment. Then they realized that what was involved was much more than alignment. What was involved was the energy that comes out of the alignment of emanations. They called that energy will. Will became the second basis. The new seers understood it as a blind, impersonal, ceaseless burst of energy that makes us behave in the ways we do. Will accounts for our perception of the world of ordinary affairs, and indirectly, through the force of that perception, it accounts for the placement of the assemblage point in its customary position. Don Juan said that the new seers examined how the perception of the world of everyday life takes place and saw the effects of will. They saw that alignment is ceaselessly renewed in order to imbue perception with continuity. To renew alignment every time with the freshness that it needs to make up a living world, the burst of energy that comes out of those very alignments is automatically rerouted to reinforce some choice alignments. This new observation served the new seers as another springboard that helped them reach the third basis of the set. They called it intent. And they described it as the purposeful guiding of will, the energy of alignment. Silvio Manuel, Gennaro, and Vicente were pushed by the Nagual Julian to learn those three aspects of the seer's knowledge. He went on. Gennaro is the master of handling awareness. Vicente is the master of stalking. And Silvio Manuel is the master of intent. We are now doing a final explanation of the mastery of awareness. This is why Gennaro is helping you. Don Juan talked to the female apprentices for a long time. The women listened with serious expressions on their faces. I felt sure he was giving them detailed instructions about difficult procedures, judging from the women's fierce concentration. I had been barred from their meeting, but I had watched them as they talked in the front room of Gennaro's house. I sat at the kitchen table, waiting until they were through. Then the women got up to leave, but before they did, they came to the kitchen with Don Juan. He sat down facing me while the women talked to me with awkward formality. They actually embraced me. All of them were unusually friendly, even talkative. They said that they were going to join the male apprentices who had gone with Gennaro hours earlier. Gennaro was going to show all of them his dreaming body. As soon as the women left, Don Juan quite abruptly resumed his explanation. He said that as time passed and the new seers established their practices, they realized that under the prevailing conditions of life, stalking only moved the assemblage points minimally. For maximum effect, stalking needed an ideal setting. It needed petty tyrants in positions of great authority and power. It became increasingly difficult for the new seers to place themselves in such situations. The task of improvising them or seeking them out became an unbearable burden. The new seers deemed it imperative to see the eagle's emanations in order to find a more suitable way to move the assemblage point. As they tried to see the emanations, they were faced with a very serious problem. They found out that there is no way to see them without running a mortal risk. And yet they had to see them. That was the time when they used the Old Seers' technique of dreaming as a shield to protect themselves from the deadly blow of the eagle's emanations. And in doing so, they realized that dreaming was, in itself, the most effective way to move the assemblage point. One of the strictest commands of the new seers, Don Juan continued, was that warriors have to learn dreaming while they are in their normal state of awareness. Following that command, I began teaching you dreaming almost from the first day we met. Why do the new seers command that dreaming has to be taught in normal awareness? I asked. Because dreaming is so dangerous and dreamers so vulnerable, he said. It is dangerous because it has inconceivable power. It makes dreamers vulnerable because it leaves them at the mercy of the incomprehensible force of alignment. The new seers realized that in our normal state of awareness, we have countless defenses that can safeguard us against the force of unused emanations that suddenly become aligned in dreaming. Don Juan explained that dreaming, like stalking, began with a simple observation. The Old Seers became aware that in dreams, the assemblage point shifts slightly to the left in a most natural manner. That point indeed relaxes when man sleeps, and all kinds of unused emanations begin to glow. The Old Seers became immediately intrigued with that observation and began to work with that natural shift until they were able to control it. They called that control dreaming, or the art of handling the dreaming body. He remarked that there is hardly a way of describing the immensity of their knowledge about dreaming. Very little of it, however, was of any use to the new seers. So when the time of reconstruction came, the new seers took for themselves only the bare essentials of dreaming to aid them in seeing the eagle's emanations and to help them move their assemblage points. He said that seers, old and new, understand dreaming as being the control of the natural shift that the assemblage point undergoes in sleep. He stressed that to control that shift does not mean in any way to direct it, but to keep the assemblage point fixed at the position where it naturally moves in sleep. A most difficult maneuver that took the Old Seers enormous effort and concentration to accomplish. Don Juan explained that dreamers have to strike a very subtle balance, for dreams cannot be interfered with, nor can they be commanded by the conscious effort of the dreamer. And yet, the shift of the assemblage point must obey the dreamer's command, a contradiction that cannot be rationalized, but must be resolved in practice. After observing dreamers while they slept, the Old Seers hit upon the solution of letting dreams follow their natural course. They had seen that in some dreams, the assemblage point of the dreamer would drift considerably deeper into the left side than in other dreams. This observation posed to them the question of whether the content of the dream makes the assemblage point move, or the movement of the assemblage point by itself produces the content of the dream by activating unused emanations. They soon realized that the shifting of the assemblage point into the left side is what produces dreams. The farther the movement, the more vivid and bizarre the dream. Inevitably, they attempted to command their dreams, aiming to make their assemblage points move deeply into the left side. Upon trying it, they discovered that when dreams are consciously or semi-consciously manipulated, the assemblage point immediately returns to its usual place. Since what they wanted was for that point to move, they reached the unavoidable conclusion that interfering with dreams was interfering with the natural shift of the assemblage point. Don Juan said that from there, the Old Seers went on to develop their astounding knowledge on the subject. A knowledge which had a tremendous bearing on what the new seers aspired to do with dreaming, but was of little use to them in its original form. He told me that thus far I had understood dreaming as being the control of dreams, and that every one of the exercises he had given me to perform, such as finding my hands in my dreams, was not, although it might seem to be, aimed at teaching me to command my dreams. Those exercises were designed to keep my assemblage point fixed at the place where it had moved in my sleep. It is here that the dreamers have to strike a subtle balance. All they can direct is the fixation of their assemblage points. Seers are like fishermen, equipped with a line that casts itself wherever it may. The only thing they can do is keep the line anchored at the place where it sinks. Wherever the assemblage point moves in dreams is called the dreaming position, he went on. The Old Seers became so expert at keeping their dreaming position that they were even able to wake up while their assemblage points were anchored there. The Old Seers called that state the dreaming body, because they controlled it to the extreme of creating a temporary new body every time they woke up at a new dreaming position. I have to make it clear to you that dreaming has a terrible drawback, he went on. It belongs to the Old Seers. It's tainted with their mood. I've been very careful in guiding you through it, but still, there's no way to make sure. What are you warning me about, Don Juan? I asked. I'm warning you about the pitfalls of dreaming, which are truly stupendous, he replied. In dreaming, there's really no way of directing the movement of the assemblage point. The only thing that dictates that shift is the inner strength or weakness of dreamers. Right there, we have the first pitfall. He said that at first the new seers were hesitant to use dreaming. It was their belief that dreaming, instead of fortifying, made warriors weak, compulsive, capricious. The Old Seers were all like that. In order to offset the nefarious effect of dreaming, since they had no other option but to use it, the new Seers developed a complex and rich system of behavior called the warrior's way, or the warrior's path. With that system, the new Seers fortified themselves and acquired the internal strength they needed to guide the shift of the assemblage point in dreams. Don Juan stressed that the strength that he was talking about was not conviction alone. No one could have had stronger convictions than the Old Seers, and yet they were weak to the core. Internal strength meant a sense of equanimity, almost of indifference, a feeling of being at ease. But above all, it meant a natural and profound bent for examination, for understanding. The new Seers called all these traits of character sobriety. The conviction that the new Seers have, he continued, is that a life of impeccability by itself leads unavoidably to a sense of sobriety. And this in turn leads to the movement of the assemblage point. I've said that the new Seers believed that the assemblage point can be moved from within. They went one step further and maintained that impeccable men need no one to guide them, that by themselves, through saving their energy, they can do everything that Seers do. All they need is a minimal chance, just to be cognizant of the possibilities that Seers have unraveled. I told him that we were back in the same position we had been in my normal state of awareness. I was still convinced that impeccability or saving energy was something so vague that it could be interpreted by anyone in whatever whimsical way he wanted. I wanted to say more to build my argument, but a strange feeling overtook me. It was an actual physical sensation that I was rushing through something, and then I rebuffed my own argument. I knew without any doubt whatsoever that Don Juan was right. All that is required is impeccability, energy, and that begins with a single act that has to be deliberate, precise, and sustained. If that act is repeated long enough, one acquires a sense of unbending intent, which can be applied to anything else. If that is accomplished, the road is clear. One thing will lead to another until the warrior realizes his full potential. When I told Don Juan what I had just realized, he laughed with apparent delight and exclaimed that this was indeed a God-sent example of the strength that he was talking about. He explained that my assemblage point had shifted and that it had been moved by sobriety to a position that fostered understanding. It could have as well been moved by capriciousness to a position that only enhances self-importance, as had been the case many times before. Let's talk now about the dreaming body, he went on. The Old Seers concentrated all their efforts on exploring and exploiting the dreaming body, and they succeeded in using it as a more practical body, which is tantamount to saying they recreated themselves in increasingly weird ways. Don Juan maintained that it is common knowledge among the new seers that flocks of the old sorcerers never came back after waking up at a dreaming position of their liking. He said that chances are they all died in those inconceivable worlds. Or they may still be alive today in who knows what kind of contorted shape or manner. He stopped and looked at me and broke into a great laugh. "You're dying to ask me what the Old Seers did with the dreaming body, aren't you?" he asked, and urged me with a movement of his chin to ask the question. Don Juan stated that Gennaro, being the indisputable master of awareness, had shown me the dreaming body many times while I was in a state of normal awareness. The effect that Gennaro was after with his demonstrations was to make my assemblage point move, not from a position of heightened awareness, but from its normal setting. Don Juan told me then, as if he were letting a secret be known, that Gennaro was waiting for us in some fields near the house to show me his dreaming body. He repeated over and over that I was now in the perfect state of awareness to see and understand what the dreaming body really is. Then he had me get up, and we walked through the front room to reach the door to the outside. As I was about to open the door, I noticed that someone was lying on the pile of floor mats that the apprentices used as beds. I thought that one of the apprentices must have returned to the house while Don Juan and I were talking in the kitchen. I went up to him, and then I realized that it was Gennaro. He was sound asleep, snoring peacefully, lying face down. "Wake him up," Don Juan said to me. "We've got to be going. He must be dead tired." I gently shook Gennaro. He slowly turned around, made the sounds of someone waking up from a deep slumber. He stretched his arms, and then he opened his eyes. I screamed involuntarily and jumped back. Gennaro's eyes were not human eyes at all. They were 2 points of intense amber light. The jolt of my fright had been so intense that I became dizzy. Don Juan tapped my back and restored my equilibrium. Gennaro stood up and smiled at me. His features were rigid. He moved as if he were drunk or physically impaired. He walked by me and headed directly for the wall. I winced at the imminent crash, but he went through the wall as if it were not there at all. He came back into the room through the kitchen doorway. And then, as I looked in true horror, Gennaro walked on the walls, with his body parallel to the ground, and on the ceiling, with his head upside down. I fell backwards as I tried to follow his movements. From that position, I didn't see Gennaro anymore. Instead, I was looking at a blob of light that moved on the ceiling above me and on the walls, circling the room. It was as if someone with a giant flashlight was shining the beam on the ceiling and the walls. The beam of light was finally turned off. It disappeared from view by vanishing against the wall. Don Juan remarked that my animal fright was always out of measure, that I had to struggle to bring it under control. But that all in all, I had behaved very well. I had seen Gennaro's dreaming body as it really is, a blob of light. I asked him how he was so sure I had done that. He replied that he had seen my assemblage point first move toward its normal setting in order to compensate for my fright, then move deeper into the left, beyond the point where there are no doubts. At that position, there is only one thing one can see: blobs of energy, he went on. But from heightened awareness to that other point deeper into the left side, it is only a short hop. The real feat is to make the assemblage point shift from its normal setting to the point of no doubt. He added that we still had an appointment with Gennaro's dreaming body in the fields around the house, while I was in normal awareness. When we were back in Silvio Manuel's house, Don Juan said that Gennaro's proficiency with the dreaming body was a very minor affair compared with what the Old Seers did with it. "You'll see that very soon," he said with an ominous tone, then laughed. I questioned him about it with mounting fear, and that only evoked more laughter. He finally stopped and said that he was going to talk about the way the new seers got to the dreaming body and the way they used it. The old seers were after a perfect replica of the body, he continued, and they nearly succeeded in getting one. The only thing they never could copy was the eyes. Instead of eyes, the dreaming body has just the glow of awareness. You never realized that before, when Gennaro used to show you his dreaming body. The new seers could not care less about a perfect replica of the body. In fact, they are not even interested in copying the body at all. But they have kept just the name dreaming body to mean a feeling, a surge of energy that is transported by the movement of the assemblage point to any place in this world, or to any place in the 7 worlds available to man. Don Juan then outlined the procedure for getting to the dreaming body. He said that it starts with an initial act, which by the fact of being sustained breeds unbending intent. Unbending intent leads to internal silence, and internal silence to the inner strength needed to make the assemblage point shift in dreams to suitable positions. He called this sequence the groundwork. The development of control comes after the groundwork has been completed. It consists of systematically maintaining the dreaming position by doggedly holding on to the vision of the dream. Steady practice results in a great facility to hold new dreaming positions with new dreams. Not so much because one gains deliberate control with practice, but because every time this control is exercised, the inner strength gets fortified. Fortified inner strength, in turn, makes the assemblage point shift into dreaming positions, which are more and more suitable to fostering sobriety. In other words, dreams by themselves become more and more manageable, even orderly. The development of dreamers is indirect, he went on. That's why the new seers believed we can do dreaming by ourselves, alone. Since dreaming uses a natural, built-in shift of the assemblage point, we should need no one to help us. What we badly need is sobriety, and no one can give it to us or help us get it except ourselves. Without it, the shift of the assemblage point is chaotic, as our ordinary dreams are chaotic. So all in all, the procedure to get to the dreaming body is impeccability in our daily life. Don Juan explained that once sobriety is acquired and the dreaming positions become increasingly stronger, the next step is to wake up at any dreaming position. He remarked that the maneuver, although made to sound simple, was really a very complex affair. So complex that it requires not only sobriety, but all the attributes of warriorship as well, especially intent. I asked him how intent helps seers wake up at a dreaming position. He replied that intent, being the most sophisticated control of the force of alignment, is what maintains, through the dreamer's sobriety, the alignment of whatever emanations have been lit up by the movement of the assemblage point. Don Juan said that there is one more formidable pitfall of dreaming: the very strength of the dreaming body. For example, it is very easy for the dreaming body to gaze at the eagle's emanations uninterruptedly for long periods of time. But it is also very easy in the end for the dreaming body to be totally consumed by them Seers who gazed at the eagle's emanations without their dreaming bodies died. And those who gazed at them with their dreaming bodies burned with the fire from within. The new seers solved the problem by seeing in teams. While one seer gazed at the emanations, others stood by ready to end the scene. How did the new seers see in teams? I asked. They dreamed together, he replied. As you yourself know, it's perfectly possible for a group of seers to activate the same unused emanations. And in this case also, there are no known steps. It just happens. There's no technique to follow. He added that in dreaming together, something in us takes the lead, and suddenly we find ourselves sharing the same view with other dreamers. What happens is that our human condition makes us focus the glow of awareness automatically on the same emanations that other human beings are using. We adjust the position of our assemblage points to fit the others around us. We do that on the right side in our ordinary perception, and we also do it on the left side while dreaming together. Chapter 12, the Nagual Julian. There was a strange excitement in the house. All the seers of Don Juan's party seemed to be so elated that they were actually absent-minded, a thing that I had never witnessed before. Their usual high level of energy appeared to have increased. I became very apprehensive. I asked Don Juan about it. He took me to the back patio. We walked in silence for a moment. He said that the time was getting closer for all of them to leave. He was pressing his explanation in order to finish it in time. How do you know that you are closer to leaving? I asked. It is an internal knowledge, he said. You'll know it someday yourself. You see, the Nagual Julian made my assemblage point shift countless times, just as I have made yours shift. Then he left me the task of realigning all those emanations which he had helped me align through these shifts. That is the task that every Nagual is left to do. At any rate, the job of realigning all those emanations paves the way for the peculiar maneuver of lighting up all the emanations inside the cocoon. I have nearly done that. I am about to reach my maximum. Since I am the Nagual, once I do light up all the emanations inside my cocoon, we will all be gone in an instant. I felt I should be sad and weep, but something in me was so overjoyed to hear that the Nagual Juan Matus was about to be free that I jumped and yelled with sheer delight. I knew that sooner or later I would reach another state of awareness and I would weep with sadness. But that day I was filled with happiness and optimism. I told Don Juan how I felt. He laughed and patted my back. Remember what I've told you, he said. Don't count on emotional realizations. Let your assemblage point move first, then years later have the realization. We walked to the big room and sat down to talk. Don Juan hesitated for a moment. He looked out of the window. From my chair I could see the patio. It was early afternoon, a cloudy day. It looked like rain. Thunderhead clouds were moving in from the west. I liked cloudy days. Don Juan did not. He seemed restless as he tried to find a more comfortable sitting position. Don Juan began his elucidation by commenting that the difficulty in remembering what takes place in heightened awareness is due to the infinitude of positions that the assemblage point can adopt after being loosened from its normal setting. Facility in remembering everything that takes place in normal awareness, on the other hand, has to do with the fixity of the assemblage point on one spot, the spot where it normally sets. He told me that he had commiserated with me. He suggested that I accept the difficulty of recollecting and acknowledge that I might fail in my task and never be able to realign all the emanations that he had helped me align. Think of it this way, he said, smiling. You may never be able to remember this very conversation that we are having now, which at this moment seems to you so commonplace, so taken for granted. This indeed is the mystery of awareness. Human beings reek of that mystery. We reek of darkness, of things which are inexplicable. To regard ourselves in any other terms is madness. So don't demean the mystery of man in you by feeling sorry for yourself or by trying to rationalize it. Demean the stupidity of man in you by understanding it, but don't apologize for either. Both are needed. One of the great maneuvers of stalkers is to pit the mystery against the stupidity in each of us. He explained that stalking practices are not something one can rejoice in. In fact, they are downright objectionable. Knowing this, the new seers realize that it would be against everybody's interest to discuss or practice the principles of stalking in normal awareness. I pointed out to him an incongruity. He had said that there is no way for warriors to act in the world while they are in heightened awareness. And he had also said that stalking is simply behaving with people in specific ways. The two statements contradicted each other. By not teaching it in normal awareness, I was referring only to teaching it to a Nagual, he said. The purpose of stalking is twofold. First, to move the assemblage point as steadily and safely as possible. And nothing can do the job as well as stalking. Second, to imprint its principles at such a deep level that the human inventory is bypassed, as is the natural reaction of refusing and judging something that may be offensive to reason. I told him that I sincerely doubted I could judge or refuse anything like that. He laughed and said that I could not be an exception, that I would react like everyone else once I heard about the deeds of a master stalker, such as his benefactor, the Nagual Julian. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that the Nagual Julian was the most extraordinary stalker I have ever met, Don Juan said. You have already heard about his stalking skills from everybody else, but I've never told you what he did to me. I wanted to make it clear to him that I had not heard anything about the Nagual Julian from anyone. But just before I voiced my protest, a strange feeling of uncertainty swept over me. Don Juan seemed to know instantly what I was feeling. He chuckled with delight. You can't remember because Will is not available to you yet, he said. You need a life of impeccability and a great surplus of energy, and then Will might release those memories. I'm going to tell you the story of how the Nagual Julian behaved with me when I first met him. If you judge him and find his behavior objectionable while you are in heightened awareness, think of how revolted you might be with him in normal awareness. I protested that he was setting me up. He assured me that all he wanted to do with his story was to illustrate the manner in which stalkers operate and the reasons why they do it. The Nagual Julian was the last of the old-time stalkers, he went on. He was a stalker not so much because of the circumstances of his life, but because that was the bent of his character. Don Juan explained that the new seers saw that there are two main groups of human beings: those who care about others and those who do not. In between these two extremes, they saw an endless mixture of the two. The Nagual Julian belonged to the category of men who do not care. Don Juan classified himself as belonging to the opposite category. But didn't you tell me that the Nagual Julian was generous? That he would give you the shirt off his back? I asked. He certainly was, Don Juan replied. Not only was he generous, he was also utterly charming, winning. He was always deeply and sincerely interested in everyone around him. He was kind and open and gave away everything he had to anyone who needed it, or to anyone he happened to like. He was in turn loved by everyone, because being a master stalker, he conveyed to them his true feelings. He didn't give a plugged nickel for any of them. I did not say anything, but Don Juan was aware of my sense of disbelief, or even distress at what he was saying. He chuckled and shook his head from side to side. That's stalking, he said. You see, I haven't even begun my story of the Nagual Julian, and you are already annoyed. He exploded into a giant laugh as I tried to explain what I was feeling. The Nagual Julian didn't care about anyone, he continued. That's why he could help people. And he did. He gave them the shirt off his back because he didn't give a fig about them. Do you mean, Don Juan, that the only ones who help their fellow men are those who don't give a damn about them? I asked, truly miffed. That's what stalkers say, he said with a beaming smile. The Nagual Julian, for instance, was a fabulous curer. He helped thousands and thousands of people, but he never took credit for it. He let people believe that a woman seer of his party was the cure. Now, if he had been a man who cared for his fellow men, he would have demanded acknowledgement. Those who care for others care for themselves and demand recognition where recognition is due. Don Juan said that he, since he belonged to the category of those who care for their fellow men, had never helped anyone. He felt awkward with generosity. He could not even conceive being loved as the Nagual Julian was. And he would certainly feel stupid giving anyone the shirt off his back. I care so much for my fellow men, he continued, that I don't do anything for them. I wouldn't know what to do. And I would always have the nagging sense that I was imposing my will on him with my gifts. Naturally, I have overcome all these feelings with the warrior's way. Any warrior can be successful with people, as the Nagual Julian was, provided he moves his assemblage point to a position where it is immaterial, whether people like him, dislike him, or ignore him. But that's not the same. Don Juan said that when he first became aware of the stalker's principles, as I was then doing, he was as distressed as he could be. The Nahual Elias, who was very much like Don Juan, explained to him that stalkers like the Nagual Julian are natural leaders of people. They can help people do anything. The Nahual Elias said that these warriors can help people to get cured, Don Juan went on. Or they can help them to get ill. They can help them to find happiness, or they could help them to find sorrow. I suggested to the Nahual Elias that instead of saying that these warriors help people, we should say that they affect people. He said that they don't just affect people, but that they actively herd them around. Don Juan chuckled and looked at me fixedly. There was a mischievous glint in his eyes. Strange, isn't it? He asked. The way stalkers arrange what they see about people. Then Don Juan started his story about the Nagual Julian. He said that the Nagual Julian spent many, many years waiting for an apprentice Nahual. He stumbled on Don Juan one day while returning home after a short visit with acquaintances in a nearby village. He was, in fact, thinking about an apprentice Nahual as he walked down the road when he heard a loud gunshot and saw people scrambling in every direction. He ran with them into the bushes by the side of the road and only came out from his hiding place at the sight of a group of people gathered around someone wounded, lying on the ground. The wounded person was, of course, Don Juan, who had been shot by the tyrannical foreman. The Nagual Julian saw instantly that Don Juan was a special man, whose cocoon was divided into 4 sections instead of 2. He also realized that Don Juan was badly wounded. He knew that he had no time to waste. His wish had been fulfilled, but he had to work fast before anyone sensed what was going on. He held his head and cried, "They've shot my son!" He was traveling with one of the female seers of his party, a husky Indian woman, who always officiated publicly as his mean, shrewish wife. They were an excellent team of stalkers. He cued the woman seer, and she also started weeping and wailing for their son, who was unconscious and bleeding to death. The Nagual Julian begged the onlookers not to call the authorities, but rather to help him move his son to his house in the city, which was some distance away. He offered money to some strong young men if they would carry his wounded, dying son. The men carried Don Juan to the Nagual Julian's house. The Nagual was very generous with them and paid them handsomely. The men were so touched by the grieving couple, who had cried all the way to the house, that they refused to take the money. But the Nagual Julian insisted that they take it to give his son luck. For a few days, Don Juan did not know what to think about the kind couple who had taken him into their home. He said that to him, the Nagual Julian appeared as an almost senile old man. He was not an Indian, but was married to a young, irascible, fat Indian wife, who was as physically strong as she was ill-tempered. Don Juan thought that she was definitely a cure, judging by the way she treated his wound and by the quantities of medicinal plants stashed away in the room where they had put him. The woman also dominated the old man and made him tend to Don Juan's wound every day. They had made a bed for Don Juan out of a thick floor mat, and the old man had a terrible time kneeling down to reach him. Don Juan had to fight not to laugh at the comical sight of the frail old man trying his best to bend his knees. Don Juan said that while the old man washed his wound, he would mumble incessantly. He had a vacant look in his eyes. His hands shook, and his body trembled from head to toe. While he was down on his knees, he could never get up by himself. He would call his wife, yelling in a raspy voice, filled with contained anger. The wife would come into the room, and both of them would get into a horrible argument. Often she would walk out, leaving the old man to get up by himself. Don Juan assured me that he had never felt so sorry for anyone as he felt for that poor, kind old man. Many times he wanted to rise and help him up, but he could hardly move himself. Once the old man spent half an hour cursing and yelling as he puffed and crawled like a slug, before he dragged himself to the door and painfully lifted himself up to a standing position. He explained to Don Juan that his poor health was due to advanced age, broken bones that had not mended properly, and rheumatism. Don Juan said that the old man raised his eyes toward heaven and confessed to Don Juan that he was the most wretched man on earth. He had come to the cure for help and had ended up marrying her and becoming a slave. I asked the old man why he didn't leave. Don Juan continued. The old man's eyes widened with fear. He choked on his own saliva, trying to hush me. And then he went rigid and fell down like a log on the floor, next to my bed, trying to make me stop talking. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what you're saying. Nobody can run away from this place. The old man kept on repeating with a wild expression in his eyes. And I believed him. I was convinced that he was more miserable, more wretched than I had ever been myself. And with every day that passed, I became more and more uncomfortable in that house. The food was great, and the woman was always out curing people. So I was left with the old man. We talked a lot about my life. I liked to talk to him. I told him that I had no money to pay him for his kindness, but that I would do anything to help him. He told me that he was beyond help, that he was ready to die, but that if I really meant what I said, he would appreciate it if I would marry his wife after he died. Right then I knew the old man was nuts. And right then I also knew that I had to run away as soon as possible. Don Juan said that when he was well enough to walk around unaided, his benefactor gave him a chilling demonstration of his ability as a stalker. Without any warning or preamble, he put Don Juan face to face with an inorganic living being. Sensing that Don Juan was planning to run away, he seized the opportunity to scare him with an ally that was somehow able to look like a monstrous man. The sight of that ally nearly drove me insane, Don Juan continued. I couldn't believe my eyes, and yet the monster was right in front of me. And the frail old man was next to me whimpering and begging the monster to spare his life. You see, my benefactor was like the Old Seers. He could dole out his fear, a piece at a time, and the ally was reacting to it. I didn't know that. All I could see with my very own eyes was a horrendous creature advancing on us, ready to tear us apart, limb from limb. The moment the ally lurched onto us, hissing like a serpent, I passed out cold. When I came to my senses again, the old man told me that he had made a deal with the creature. He explained to Don Juan that the man had agreed to let both of them live, provided Don Juan enter the man's service. Don Juan apprehensively asked what was involved in the service. The old man replied that it would be slavery, but pointed out that Don Juan's life had nearly ended a few days back when he had been shot. Had not he and his wife come along to stop the bleeding, Don Juan would surely have died. So there was really very little to bargain with, or to bargain for. The monstrous man knew that and had him over a barrel. The old man told Don Juan to stop vacillating and accept the deal, because if he refused, the monstrous man, who was listening behind the door, would burst in and kill them both on the spot and be done with it. I had enough nerve to ask the frail old man, who was shaking like a leaf, how the man would kill us. Don Juan went on. He said that the monster planned to break all the bones in our bodies, starting with our feet. As we screamed in unspeakable agony, and that it would take at least 5 days for us to die. I accepted that man's conditions instantly. The old man, with tears in his eyes, congratulated me and said that the deal wasn't really that bad. We were going to be more prisoners than slaves of the monstrous man. but we would eat at least twice a day. And since we had life, we could work for our freedom. We could plot, connive, and fight our way out of that hell. Don Juan smiled and then broke into laughter. He had known beforehand how I would feel about the Nagual Julian. "I told you you'd be upset," he said. "I really don't understand, Don Juan," I said. "What was the point of putting on such an elaborate masquerade?" "The point is very simple," he said, still smiling. "This is another method of teaching, a very good one. It requires tremendous imagination and tremendous control on the part of the teacher. My method of teaching is closer to what you consider teaching. It requires a tremendous amount of words. I go to the extremes of talking. The Nagual Julian went to the extremes of stalking." Don Juan said that there were two methods of teaching among the seers. He was familiar with both of them. He preferred the one that called for explaining everything and letting the other person know the course of action beforehand. It was a system that fostered freedom, choice, and understanding. His benefactor's method, on the other hand, was more coercive and did not allow for choice or understanding. Its great advantage was that it forced warriors to live the seer's concepts directly, with no intermediary elucidation. Don Juan explained that everything his benefactor did to him was a masterpiece of strategy. Every one of the Nagual Julian's words and actions was deliberately selected to cause a particular effect. His art was to provide his words and actions with the most suitable context so that they would have the necessary impact. "That's the stalker's method," Don Juan went on. "It fosters not understanding, but total realization. For instance, it took me a lifetime to understand what he had done to me by making me face the ally. Although I realized all that without any explanation as I lived that experience. I've told you that Gennaro, for example, doesn't understand what he does, but his realization of what he is doing is as keen as it can be. That's because his assemblage point was moved by the stalker's method. He said that if the assemblage point is forced out of its customary setting by the method of explaining everything, as in my case, there is always the need for someone else, not only to help in the actual dislodging of the assemblage point, but in dispensing the explanations of what is going on. But if the assemblage point is moved by the stalker's method, as in his own case, or Gennaro's, there is only a need for the initial catalytic act that yanks the point from its location. Don Juan said that when the Nagual Julian made him face the monstrous-looking ally, his assemblage point moved under the impact of fear. So intense a fright as that caused by the confrontation, coupled with his weak physical condition, was ideal for dislodging his assemblage point. In order to offset the injurious effects of fright, Its impact had to be cushioned, but not minimized. Explaining what was happening would have minimized fear. What the Nagual Julian wanted was to make sure that he could use that initial catalytic fright as many times as he needed it. But he also wanted to make sure that he could cushion its devastating impact. That was the reason for his masquerade. The more elaborate and dramatic his stories were, the greater their cushioning effect. If he himself seemed to be in the same boat with Don Juan, the fright would not be as intense as if Don Juan were alone. With his penchant for drama, Don Juan went on. My benefactor was able to move my assemblage point enough to imbue me right away with an overpowering feeling for the two basic qualities of warriors: sustained effort and unbending intent. I knew that in order to be free again someday, I would have to work in an orderly and steady fashion and in cooperation with the frail old man, who in my opinion needed my help as much as I needed his. I knew beyond a shadow of doubt that that was what I wanted to do more than anything else in life. I did not get to talk to Don Juan again until 2 days later. We were in Oaxaca, strolling in the main square in the early morning. There were children walking to school, people going to church, a few men sitting on the benches, and taxi drivers waiting for tourists from the main hotel. It goes without saying that the most difficult thing in the warrior's path is to make the assemblage point move, Don Juan said. That movement is the completion of the warrior's quest. To go on from there is another quest. It is the seer's quest proper. He repeated that in the warrior's way, the shift of the assemblage point is everything. The old seers absolutely failed to realize this truth. They thought the movement of the point was like a marker that determined their positions on a scale of worth. They never conceived that it was that very position which determined what they perceived. The stalker's method, Don Juan went on, in the hands of a master stalker like the Nagual Julian, accounts for stupendous shifts of the assemblage point. These are very solid changes. You see, by buttressing the apprentice, the stalker teacher gets the apprentice's full cooperation and full participation. To get anybody's full cooperation and full participation is about the most important outcome of the stalker's method. And the Nagual Julian was the best at getting both of them. Don Juan said that there was no way for him to describe the turmoil that he went through as he found out, little by little, about the richness and the complexity of the Nagual Julian's personality and life. As long as Don Juan faced a scared, frail old man who seemed helpless, he was fairly at ease, comfortable. But one day, soon after they had made the deal with what Don Juan thought of as a monstrous-looking man, his comfort was shot to pieces when the Nagual Julian gave Don Juan another unnerving demonstration of his stalking skills. Although Don Juan was quite well by then, the Nagual Julian still slept in the same room with him in order to nurse him. When he woke up that day, he announced to Don Juan that their captor was gone for a couple days, which meant that he did not have to act like an old man. He confided to Don Juan that he only pretended to be old in order to fool the monstrous-looking man. Without giving Don Juan time to think, he jumped up from his mat with incredible agility. He bent over and dunked his head in a pot of water and kept it there for a while. When he straightened up, his hair was jet black. The gray hair had washed away, and Don Juan was looking at a man he had never seen before. A man perhaps in his late 30s. He flexed his muscles, breathed deeply, and stretched every part of his body as if it had been too long inside a constricting cage. When I saw the Nagual Julian as a young man, I thought that he was indeed the devil. Don Juan went on. I closed my eyes and knew that my end was near. The Nagual Julian laughed until he was crying. Don Juan said that the Nagual Julian then put him at ease by making him shift back and forth between the right side and the left side awareness. For 2 days the young man pranced around the house. Don Juan continued. He told me stories about his life and jokes that sent me reeling around the room with laughter. But what was even more astounding was the way his wife had changed. She was actually thin and beautiful. I thought she was a completely different woman. I raved about how complete her change was and how beautiful she looked. The young man said that when their captor was away, she was actually another woman. Don Juan laughed and said that his devilish benefactor was telling the truth. The woman was really another seer of the Nagual's party. Don Juan asked the young man why they pretended to be what they were not. The young man looked at Don Juan, his eyes filled with tears, and said that the mysteries of the world are indeed unfathomable. He and his young wife had been caught by inexplicable forces and had to protect themselves with that pretense. The reason why he carried on the way he did, as a feeble old man, was that their captor was always peeking in through cracks in the doors. He begged Don Juan to forgive him for having fooled him. Don Juan asked who that monstrous-looking man was. With a deep sigh, the young man confessed that he could not even guess. He told Don Juan that although he himself was an educated man, a famous actor from the theater in Mexico City, he was at a loss for explanations. All he knew was that he had to come to be treated for the consumption that he had suffered from for many years. He was near death when his relatives brought him to meet the cure. She helped him to get well, and he fell madly in love with the beautiful young Indian and married her. His plans were to take her to the capital so they could get rich with her curing ability. Before they started on the trip to Mexico City, she warned him that they had to disguise themselves in order to escape our sorcerer. She explained to him that her mother had also been a curer and had been taught curing by that master sorcerer, who had demanded that she, the daughter, stay with him for life. The young man said that he had refused to ask his wife about that relationship. He only wanted to free her, so he disguised himself as an old man and disguised her as a fat woman. Their story did not end happily. The horrible man caught them and kept them as prisoners. They did not dare to take off their disguise in front of that nightmarish man. And in his presence, they carried on as if they hated each other. But in reality, they pined for each other and lived only for the short times when that man was away. Don Juan said that the young man embraced him and told him that the room where Don Juan was sleeping was the only safe place in the house. Would he please go out and be on the lookout while he made love to his wife? The house shook with their passion, Don Juan went on, while I sat by the door feeling guilty for listening and scared to death that the man would come back any minute. And sure enough, I heard him coming into the house. I banged on the door, and when they didn't answer, I walked in. The young woman was asleep naked, and the young man was nowhere in sight. I had never seen a beautiful naked woman in my life. I was still very weak. I heard the monstrous man rattling outside. My embarrassment and my fear was so great that I passed out. The story about the Nagual Julian's doings annoyed me no end. I told Don Juan that I had failed to understand the value of the Nagual Julian's stalking skills. Don Juan listened to me without making a single comment and let me ramble on and on. When we finally sat down on a bench, I was very tired. I did not know what to say when he asked me why his account of the Nagual Julian's method of teaching had upset me so much. I can't shake off the feeling that he was a prankster, I finally said. Pranksters don't teach anything deliberately with their pranks, Don Juan retorted. The Nagual Julian played dramas, magical dramas, that required a movement of the assemblage point. He seems like a very selfish person to me, I insisted. He seems like that to you because you are judging, he replied. You are being a moralist. I went through all that myself. If you feel the way you do on hearing about the Nagual Julian, think of the way I must have felt myself living in his house for years. I judged him, I feared him, and I envied him, in that order. I also loved him, but my envy was greater than my love. I envied his ease, his mysterious capacity to be young or old at will. I envied his flair, and above all, his influence on whoever happened to be around. It would drive me up the walls to hear him engage people in the most interesting conversation. He always had something to say. I never did, and I always felt incompetent, left out. Don Juan's revelations made me feel ill at ease. I wished that he would change the subject, for I did not want to hear that he was like me. In my opinion, He was indeed unequaled. He obviously knew how I felt. He laughed and patted my back. "What I am trying to do with the story of my envy," he went on, "is to point out to you something of great importance. That the position of the assemblage point dictates how we behave and how we feel. My great flaw at that time was that I could not understand this principle. I was raw. I lived through self-importance, just as you do, because that was where my assemblage point was lodged. You see, I hadn't learned yet that the way to move that point is to establish new habits, to will it to move. When it did move, it was as if I had just discovered that the only way to deal with peerless warriors like my benefactor is not to have self-importance, so that one can celebrate them unbiasedly. He said that realizations are of two kinds. One is just pep talk, great outbursts of emotion, and nothing more. The other is the product of a shift of the assemblage point. It is not coupled with an emotional outburst, but with action. The emotional realizations come years later, after warriors have solidified, by usage, the new position of their assemblage points. The Nagual Julian tirelessly guided all of us to do that kind of shift, Don Juan went on. He got from all of us total cooperation and total participation in his bigger-than-life dramas. For instance, with his drama of the young man and his wife and their captor, he had my undivided attention and concern. To me, the story of the old man who was young was very consistent. I had seen the monstrous-looking man with my very own eyes, which meant that the young man got my undying affiliation. Don Juan said that the Nagual Julian was a magician, a conjurer, who could handle the force of will to a degree that would be incomprehensible to the average man. His dramas included magical characters summoned by the force of intent, like the inorganic being that could adopt a grotesque human form. The Nagual Julian's power was so impeccable, Don Juan went on, that he could force anyone's assemblage point to shift and align emanations that would make him perceive whatever the Nagual Julian wanted. For example, he could look very old or very young for his age, depending on what he wanted to accomplish. And to all anyone who knew the Nagual could say about his age was that it fluctuated. During the 32 years that I knew him, he was at times not much older than you are now, and at other times he was so wretchedly old that he could not even walk. Don Juan said that under his benefactor's guidance, his assemblage point moved unnoticeably and yet profoundly. For instance, out of nowhere one day, he realized that he had a fear that on the one hand made no sense to him at all, and on the other hand made all the sense in the world. My fear was that through stupidity I would lose my chance to be free, and I would repeat my father's life. There was nothing wrong with my father's life, mind you. He lived and died, no better and no worse than most men. The important point is that my assemblage point had moved, and I realized one day that my father's life and death hadn't amounted to a hill of beans, either to others or to himself. My benefactor told me that my father and mother had lived and died just to have me, and that their own parents had done the same for them. He said that warriors were different, and that they shift their assemblage points enough to realize the tremendous price that has been paid for their lives. This shift gives them the respect and awe that their parents never felt for life in general, or for being alive in particular. Don Juan said that not only was the Nagual Julian successful in guiding his apprentices to move their assemblage points, but that he enjoyed himself tremendously while doing it. He certainly entertained himself immensely with me, Don Juan went on. When the other seers of my party began to come years later, even I looked forward to their preposterous situations that he created and developed with each one of them. When the Nagual Julian left the world, delight went away with him and never came back. Gennaro delights us sometimes, but no one can take the Nagual Julian's place. His dramas were always bigger than life. I assure you, we didn't know what enjoyment was until we saw what he did when some of those dramas backfired on him. Don Juan rose from his favorite bench. He turned to me. His eyes were brilliant and peaceful. "If you are ever so dumb as to fail in your task," he said, "you must have at least enough energy to move your assemblage point in order to come to this bench. Sit down here for an instant, free of thoughts and desires. I will try to come here from wherever I am and collect you. I promise you that I will try." He then broke into a great laugh, as if the scope of his promise was too ludicrous to be believed. "These words should be said in the late afternoon," he said, still laughing. "Never in the morning. The morning makes one feel optimistic, and such words lose their meaning."